We're really, really excited to be with you today. And today is going to be a really great day of some interesting discussions that speaks to the advertising and marketing space. So we really, really look forward to you joining us today. This year's theme is a really, really interesting one. It's called Understanding the New Africa. So under Understanding the New Africa, I'm really, really excited to introduce our keynote speaker, Mr. Feyi Olubodu. He's the former Managing Director of Insight Publicist, and he's now the Managing Director of Open Squares Consulting, Forte. And his forte, is strategy, and also he's an author of several marketing and communications books. And I know we've shared some of his books around, and it's really, really taught us a lot of things. So I'm really, really excited to introduce Feyi. After that, we've got marketing and agency experts that will join us today. So without further ado, Mr. Feyi to the stage.
it show my hands, by the way? Because I'm. Oh, so it's fine if I'm. Okay, so that's all right. Hi, good morning, everyone. How are you doing? I hope you're having a good morning. My name is Feyi Olubodun, as I've been introduced. I'm the author of The Villager, How Africans Consume Brands, and also managing partner of Open Squares. I'm going to be talking to you for just a few minutes about understanding the new African consumer. And I think I'd like to start by, posing the question that is implied in the topic, which is, one, is there a substantive difference between Western consumers and African consumers? Otherwise, why are we even discussing African consumers? And secondly, has anything changed in African consumers over the past few years, particularly considering global trends, considering current trends that are even running through the continent, and also the impact of the pandemic? Let me start by addressing the first question of whether there's a difference between Western consumers and African consumers. The short answer is yes, and I'd like to show you very briefly where the differences lie. First of all, the answer is yes, and the difference is valuable and substantial enough for us to examine it and also to leverage it when it comes to brand building and building businesses and the likes. What do I mean by the difference is substantial enough? I mean, every culture has, every continent, every culture, they have differences to each other. But in some cases, the differences are not so substantial that they make impact on businesses, on brands, on products and services being rendered. But what studies have shown, and the work we have even done has shown, is that clearly the difference between African consumers and Western consumers are significant enough for businesses and for brands to consider them and actually to even leverage them when they are doing work on the continent. Several studies have gone to show this. For instance, the work done by Professors Hofstadter on national culture has gone to show that different continents and different countries have significantly different national cultures that actually impact how businesses are done there. For instance, the power distance in the West is typically lower than the power distance in Africa and Asian cultures. And therefore, when you are building brands and launching brands and products in countries that are communal in nature, like African and Asian countries, you have to consider the fact that the power distance is significant. The power distance is huge. And that's something that you have to use in what you're doing. Joseph Heinrich, a professor at Stanford, who did a study and gave a framework called WEIRD. He wrote a book about this called The Weirdest People on the Earth. WEIRD is westernized, industrialized, educated, rich, and developed. Proposes or states that most of the psychology by which we view consumers from across the world, 95% of it is based on Western psychology, which is primarily an American psychology. In other words, we view the world with an American lens. Professor Heinrich is saying now that we need multiple lenses to actually view the world if we're going to see the world correctly. Joseph Charles, in his work on deep cultural immersion, also says that you have to study the different dilemmas and the different conflicts that are subliminal to every culture in order to have a lens by which you properly see the culture. What these three great people are saying, professors are saying, is actually that culture is the invisible barrier that brands and businesses must cross in order to win the hearts of consumers. If you don't sell to consumers within their cultural frame of reference, you're not going to win their hearts. How does this apply to the African consumer? The difference between the African and the Western consumer is hinged on several factors, but I'll talk about just two today. One is the fact that the Western culture is individualistic in nature, while the African culture is communal in nature. So what does that mean? What we've discovered is that the African consumer is a villager, but the village is not a geographical location. In our studies, it's actually a psychological construct that has 5 components. And those components are: 1, staying cultural, herd mentality, the value of the enemy, the pillars of religion, and signaling your consumption. In other words, for the African consumer, because he's communal, he conducts himself wherever he is, being mindful of his cultural origins and his cultural identity. So that's staying cultural. He's mindful of going through life, the stages of life at the same pace as his demographic cohorts, what we fondly call age mates. Africans are big on the idea of age mates, that you achieve the rites of passage in life at the same pace as your age mates. If that is not done, there is community sanctions for that. So we get married at the same time as our age mates, have children, and so on and so forth, likely because we are a very communal culture. The third is the value of the enemy. Now, most of us, most of our viewers here, you've probably been taught that in order for you to build brands, you have to use Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Well, our studies from the likes of Professor Hofstadter have shown that actually Maslow's hierarchy of needs does not apply to Africans and Asians. It actually applies primarily to Westerners because it is built on an individualistic frame of thinking. And because Africans and Asians are communal in nature, the desire for self-actualization, which is centered on the individual, does not apply to us. What we have found is that what motivates the African deeply is the need to prove somebody wrong who has told them they cannot achieve something in life. And we call this the value of the enemy. And the enemy for us is not an antagonist, it's actually a motivator, it's a strong motivation. You see this in all our songs, you see this in our music. Every African artist has a club banger that is an anti-hater track, isn't that so? I always love quoting one of Olamide's song in his album, The Glory, where he says, Oluwa jen lowo jen lota, tomba tamoto tutun, kima bere pe lunonta. And basically what he's saying is praying to God to allow him to continue to have enemies, because that's what will motivate him. Fourthly is the pillars of religion. In Africa, we believe that there is a God that wants us to have a great destiny, which is really just achieving fame and fortune, and that there are hindrances on the way to pursuit of that destiny. We call those destiny destroyers, and that there are enablers on the way to that destiny, which we call destiny helpers. Finally, we signal the stage that we are in our life's journey by the brands that we consume, and we call this signaling your consumption, this sense of arriving. How do we know you have arrived? By the car you drive, by the clothes you wear, by all kinds of stuff because of social consumption. And the second thing that is critical, where I like to just anchor it, is that we are a qualitative culture. We are not very quantitative, which means most of our value system is not driven by data. What that means is that we then are a very aspirational bunch of consumers. And that aspiration means that brands have to begin to think about what is the dream value of their brand, and how does your brand sit in the aspirational horizon of your target consumers. When they see where they are going, do they see your brand as part of their journey? And that's part of how we have to begin to leverage the aspirational value, the aspirational spirit of the African, and all of that. So finally, has COVID changed consumers? This African consumer that we've tried to describe very briefly, has COVID changed them significantly? Because COVID changed everything and everybody in the world. The answer is yes and no. Yes, it has changed consumers significantly from a financial perspective. It has affected their spending habits, their preferences for products across, whether the products are premium products, value for money products, and all of that, likely because of the economic impact of the pandemic. But from a cultural perspective, the answer is no. The reason is that studies have shown that it takes about 10 years for you to be exposed to a consistent influence in order for your deeper cultural values to shift. Secondly is, because we are communal, during the pandemic, actually, we moved towards living in households. Though some of those households were no longer our households of origin, they were either households of friends or cohorts, our extended families that lived together. So that rather strengthened the communal values, the deep-seated values that define the African consumer as a villager. And in studies and work that we've done for clients post the pandemic, it still shows that these same values still define who the consumers are, both before the pandemic and after the pandemic. So to a large extent, the African consumer is still the same. It's different from the Westerner. That difference is big enough, is valuable enough for us to use it to build businesses and brands. Thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. Can I stand up now?
Okay. And we're back. Thank you very much to everyone who stayed tuned in. Thank you, Mr. Fiyu Olubodu, for your brilliant opening remarks and for graciously joining us for this session. For this panel, I have three wonderful people who will be joining me as we discuss the topic around on stereotyping in the marketing industry. To my left, I have Carol Ofem, who is head of strategy, director at Yellow Brick Road. I have Mr. Fiyu Olubodu, who you've all met. He's a managing consultant at Open Squares. And I have Ms. Ope Makinwa, who is head of reserve at Diageo. Like I said, we'll be talking about on stereotyping in the marketplace. But before we start, I'd just like my panelists to just say one or two things about themselves. And I'll start with Carol. Please introduce yourself. What you do.
My name is Carol Ofem Shomorin. I consider myself a strategy chick. This is all I've ever done. This is all I know. And I'm just always curious to understand what the market is saying, what people are saying, so that we can make better claims. Yeah.
Mr. Fee, again.
My name is Feyi Olubodu. I'm passionate about the African continent and what makes us different and how businesses can use that.
Hi, my name is Opeyemi Makinwa. I'm very passionate about consumers and what actually informs their buying process, and that's what I do with Diageo where I work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In preparing for this session, I personally had my world open up to a whole new experience, just researching and learning about when we talk about on stereotyping, the first thing that comes to our minds are the biases that exist in the workplace, the biases that exist in Nigeria, in life, and all of that. But it interested me to know that the United Nations, UN Women especially, and with the representative who is here, who I also have had discussions with even before the panel, have really focused on this as a big issue because of how, we all know what it means to be, with stereotypes. It makes people feel very excluded, it makes people feel unwanted, and more women, the numbers, and we know how it is with Nigerian data, but more and more women, I found out, are leaving the marketing and communication space because of all these unnecessary stereotypes that happen. I would really quickly like to read just a few things that I found that I know would interest you, my viewers who are watching. On Stereotype Alliance is a thought and action platform that seeks to eradicate harmful gender-based stereotypes, especially in the media and advertising space. And we all know how these stereotypes, seep into our lives through our media, through marketing, and all of that. Very quickly, I'll turn to my panel, and I'll start with the man, the only man on the team. And my first question to you, sir, would be, do you think it's important for marketing professionals and advertisers, particularly in Nigeria? I always say, I still had this conversation in the office. I say there's Africa and there's Nigeria. Our behavior is different. So do you think it is important for marketing professionals and advertisers, particularly in Nigeria, to unstereotype their advertising?
The short answer to that is yes, we must, for very practical reasons. 50% of the population is women, and just from that point of view alone, we should do that. But the first barrier that has to be crossed is really within the industry itself. If you look at the industry, we don't have 50% representation of women at any level at all.
Absolutely.
When you are developing communication marketing interventions, there is the hidden bias of you projecting who you are. So if I'm a man, I'm working on a female brand, I would think from a masculine perspective, unless I consciously overcome that bias. And so we'll help the process if, first of all, we crack representation within the industry itself, and the people that actually work on brands and so on and so forth. And then we translate that to what we do for the larger population.
Thank you very much. When I asked that question, Carol and I were nodding very viciously because a few conversations have happened around excluding the female voice, which I think is a very important voice in conversations and decisions that concern marketing and advertising. Same question to you, Carol. Do you think it's important?
So I think it's very important, but I think I go slightly away from how you've approached it, because you've approached it from like an industry perspective. I think I've approached it from a consumer perspective. And I find that the exclusion exists because there is lack of formative research. I think that there is a deliberate and maybe unintentional effort being put to not knowing enough about the consumer. And it's just silently seeping into all the ads that we're seeing. That brands are so concerned about basket size and what happens after, which is the sales end of it, and less concerned about human behavior and consumer psychology, which kind of should influence why people are going into the store and picking certain things into their basket sizes. So I think if brands, the industry, are not deliberate in understanding consumers and where the exclusion is, where the inclusion should be, and doing research to understand why people are either involved or not involved in consumer messaging or comms messaging, we would continue being in a vicious cycle that just excludes people without knowing. Look at FMCG brands, for instance. And there's been a very long cycle on how we advertise consumer brands and how we place women in front of the advertising.
Absolutely.
As if to say men do not use the brands and cannot be placed in the advertising. So I know, yes, we should speak for women, but we should also speak for men.
Absolutely.
And we should speak about how to include them in the conversation that creates balance.
Yeah.
Because men are cooking. And are they represented in the comms in the last 20 years, 10 years? And it's, pharmaceutical research that helps us to understand that so that we can balance that conversation outside of basket size and what happens after in sales to be more aware, more inclusive.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, you just brought to mind, we had said we're not going to mention any brands, but I really would give it up to brands, exactly the exact example you gave about putting the man in the kitchen, for example. Because I remember working on a brand recently and I felt like, okay, we're going to be showing people cooking and more on social media, especially, which is where most of us consume our content and everything. We see men cooking, so why can't a man be in this ad also holding the spoon? Don't you think, and I'm coming to you last because you're the client. You're the one who pays our salary. But I just want to piggyback off what you just said. Don't you think all of this is happening because of Nigeria? Remember what I said is Nigeria and Africa. Deeply patriarchal, deeply religious, deeply everything. Putting women in boxes and thinking that we should remain in certain places and not.
So I agree in terms of, and I won't call it surface level because it's not, right? It's ingrained in our culture. It's what we were born to see. Our parents have a certain tone when they speak to girls and boys. It's just what it is,
Absolutely.
right? But I think that it doesn't take away from the fact that there is also truth in extending the category. And are we going to always consider the fact that because Nigeria is a certain way, we can't do things a certain way? And I think those two things are truisms that can exist and find a balance to exist. We can't keep being hinged on the fact that we passively say, we are Nigerians. But we are Nigerians doesn't make everybody a Yahoo boy or girl, right? So you would fight somebody when they say, Nigerians do. No, you're going to hold up a bit. Hold up a second. Like, people do that, but not all Nigerians. So it's the same thing that we have to apply. Because we are born, or society kind of structures some certain conversations or thought process about how Nigerians do a certain thing, doesn't mean that there is no space to understand how Nigerians also think about a certain thing and how that can be represented in comms. So it's finding a place for those two things to exist. So where we say this has to be done in a certain way, but hey, balance it up here, and just find that tempo that works for both.
Yeah, and to our clients. Why has this been? Because I know we were having those conversations, and you told me how Diageo has intentionally on stereotypes, and you even mentioned some of the ads, but why did that, even become a thing? Why did the organization consider it important to unstereotype your advertising?
Okay, thank you very much for that. It's not only important, it is very urgent, and it is now. The thing is, a lot of people used to talk about diversity and inclusion, as a buzzword and something that we would come to, but what happened in COVID years is we realized that there was an increase in discrimination. That's when you saw a lot of Black Lives Matters, there was an increase in gender inequality because women were more relegated to take your kids at home and all of that. And it became very important. And because the consumer and the average Nigerian, not only just, I'm not even speaking of the world, everyone is getting more exposed and aware, and they're holding large organizations responsible. So if you don't contribute, maybe when Black Lives Matters or mattered happen, or it still matters, sorry, when it happened at the time, and some brands were very passive, they didn't contribute, they were called out. Twitter is a platform where people would just call you out. So your not contributing or lack of not doing that just, classifies you as sort of irresponsible. So you have to lend your voice to things like that, like the social ills. So we realized that, in terms of that, boycotts were happening. People would boycott your brands if you don't lend your voice to important matters. And ingrained in that is also how you just even position your brand, So you see, you want to be very authentic to the customer. You want to understand the consumer. You want to understand their buying process. You want to understand, she said something about their psychology. So if you're a brand that, sort of you put yourself as responsible, and I'm not just talking about gender to just women now in terms of diversity and inclusion. Yeah. There are a lot of things that come to play, like ethnicity, sexual orientation, and all of that. So if you don't do those things and you don't lend your voice to those things or correct those habits, you are deemed and judged as irresponsible, and then you can face losses in profits. It could, affect that. And we're not looking to say just the bottom line or the profit, It's actually walking your walk and caring about these people. So I can't say that I'm a sustainable organization and then I put child labor, and all of that. So these are very hotly debated topics, and brands are paying attention, the consumer is more aware, and they're holding big brands and organizations accountable.
Thank you very much. Because when for big brands like yours and other big brands, when we talk about issues like this, people just always look at it as just some CSR project that is just happening, to take a box in the organization. But I see that, your organization is taking intentional steps in this light. So it goes to my second question, which is it possible to successfully unstereotype ads, unstereotype everything that we see? And this is because when I was researching, I found that 88%, in spite of how exposure has happened or how exposed we think that a lot of us are, out of 1,000 respondents in Nigeria, 88% still believe that women should work less and devote their time to house and family work. 50% believe that in times of food shortages, priority should be given to the men. And 54% believe that men make better executives than women.
You're looking at me. Oh, you want me to go first?
Honestly, please go first.
I think to your question about unstereotyping, it would be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I think to expect that anything that would be done to move the needle or really shake tables, as they say, would come so easy is a lie. I think that there are biases that have held ground for a long time because there's been a way to life like that for a while, right? It's weird to expect that people would, I don't say this is not good, but it's weird to expect that people would see women to make such certain choices as execs better than men, because have they seen more women as execs more than men? So those responses are coming from the realities of what we're living at, right? But we can also say that we know women that are better execs than men, right? And it's about creating forth and just creating space for it. I think in terms of finding the solution, there won't be like an easy solution. I think it's the deliberate effort to try and put people that are stereotyped in a certain way into places where they can, let me just use the word, breaking the bias, right? Whether it's men or women. I think just giving a foreign example, if you look at a lot of foreign brands now, there's a lot of interracial couples when they're advertising in the US and in the UK. It's deliberate because people are saying, well, you can't only use white couples. You can't only use Caucasians. You can't only use black people. You have to, there's a reality of that mix. And And if you think about that reality, it's kind of new, or maybe call it recent, but it is deliberate to create the space for the inclusion. So I think it's the same way. If people feel that women should work less and take care of kids, I think you can't blame them because that's an acceptable thought because that's what they know. And it is also that you balance that conversation with women who have families and are working. It's hard. If you ask them, it is hard. But it's that you find the space for that thought process to not be the only one that exists. You have to open the ground for more uncomfortable conversations and decisions so people can see that this is not necessarily in its entirety true. And yeah, women can, it will be tough to be a new mom, and I'm speaking from experience, to be a new mom and come back to work after 3 months is tough.
Yeah.
But it is that my colleagues can see that it is possible without negating the fact that it is tough. So I think it will be uncomfortable, but the more we open the ways and the paths for that to happen, the more it can gain acceptance.
Thank you. I'll go to Okwe. Now, I'm not an advocate for just put a woman there because you need to balance the table and all of that. But in your organization, how have they been intentional in creating that space for the female voice?
Thank you. So what...
I mean, you're ahead of
so to be honest, like you said, I'm not an advocate for just putting a woman just to tick the box or just put a woman there for putting a woman there for the sake of putting a woman there. What we do is we try to ensure that the woman develops the skills that is required to make her as good as the man. Like she said, it's a reality in Nigeria and everywhere that once you put a man and a woman and an opportunity comes, you tilt more towards the man because the woman has other responsibilities, like she has to cater to the husband, she has the home front, she can come back and say she's pregnant, we don't want to do, but the man just does it, But what we try to do, is try to say, what, you have to equip the woman, you have to train the woman and give her the equal opportunity to succeed as the man. That's it, pretty much.
Mr. Faye, have you used, I've followed you for a while, so have you used your platform to intentionally create that?
Well, I've always believed in gender equality when I was CEO of Insights. I think we recognized them because I had a perfectly gender balanced executive. It was 8 people and it was 4 females and 4 males, and it was a wonderful experience. I always talk about this all the time. Because I talk about Africa, people expect that I will lean towards some of the stereotypes. But I always correct them that if you study Nigeria, for instance, most of these stereotypes are coming from the urban centers, not the rural centers. I didn't grow up in Lagos, I grew up outside Lagos. In most of the rural centers and the suburban areas, there's actually a lot of gender equality. In most of those places, women are the ones that are put in charge of running the economy of the cities and the villages because they believe that women are better with economic matters and financial matters. That's what you see there. When you come to places like Lagos, because Lagos is a potpourri of different cultures, it's cosmopolitan, it doesn't exactly have a distinctive culture. It's a blend of Western cultures transitioning into African cultures and all of that. So that's where you find that coming from. That's one. The second part is, I don't think that we should look at it from unstereotyping. We should look at it from re-stereotyping. Because stereotypes will exist forever. It's a construct in the human mind to navigate life. It's a visual embodiment of an idea. So we always have stereotypes. Okay, I made a joke the other day that when I was growing up, men that have mustache only were considered womanizers, and everybody started laughing. And like, if a man has a mustache alone, you don't trust him. He has to have a beard. It's okay. It's just a stereotype. But I think if you look at, there are several things that has to be done. Carol and Okwe has talked about some things that need to be done in terms of creating the room, creating the opportunity. I think also we need to encourage women to come forward.
Yeah.
There's a brilliant book titled Women Don't Ask. And the premise of the book is that they studied it and discovered that there are certain opportunities in the workplace that if you embrace them, they advance your career faster. And that when those opportunities come, women never come forward to say, I'd like to do that. It's almost always the men that come forward. And so the men tend to advance further. I'll give you an example of that. If you go on social media today and you type a business topic, almost always, most of the thought leaders are men. If you type a topic that has to do with relationship and entertainment, almost always the thought leaders are women. The question is, aren't there women who are smart enough to be thought leaders about business topics? We've listened to Carol, we've listened to Ope. You can see they're on fire. But how many of women like that come out to put themselves and stand in front of a camera and say, I want to talk about this, and become authority in those areas? In a world where today, for you to be selected as an executive, for instance, they check your social media. Do you understand? Who are you following? What are you talking about? If on your social media you are talking about, relationship issues, fashion, and all of those things, and you want to be an executive in a finance company, you haven't said anything about finance in the past 6 months on your social media, but you know it. You're just not coming forward with what you know. You are also responding to the stereotype of women are all about relationships and not about. So we have to sort of do a re-stereotyping and say there are some things that women, and I don't know why in Nigeria we don't have 50% of bank CEOs as women. Women handle money better than men by far, statistically and generationally proven. Women are never broke. We know this. You never know you guys say you are broke. We know you are never. So I think that's kind of two areas that we need to look at, and we need to begin to do the work.
Thank you very much. I mean, I like that. It's not about, you're right, you're spot on. Stereotypes will forever exist. So I think, especially in our own industry, it's more about re-stereotyping and not just trying to un-stereotype. So as we round up, last question for you, Carol. What advice would you give to industry professionals who are trying to elevate their marketing to ensure it reflects and attracts a wider and more diverse audience? After all, they say the bigger the audience, the bigger the business. The money. We're all about the bottom line. We're all talking about bottom line. So
I think the first thing is don't send out briefs without research.
Yeah.
I think it's, permit me to say, laughable. You want someone to help communicate, to be a category leader or this, with all the goals and objectives. And then you ask, who's the audience? And it's literally a one slide. There should be research. What are their buying patterns? Why did they choose a certain way? What are they watching? What is influencing that choice? You can't want to change how you communicate without doing the work of research. And I think that's something that's, we just kind of push it aside. Although I know my consumer, they're going to buy this color. Okay, in the last 6 months, have they? Is there, why do we have trend watching? We have trend watching because we're seeing a pattern that this is going to move on the edge. Why is it going to move? A team is sitting down, looking and watching and looking at the responses and understanding why people are making choices. If brands want to change the way they communicate and be more inclusive and re-stereotype, research. It all goes back to understanding why. Why are they behaving? What is this behavior? Why is it changing? Why has it stayed the same? Why is it going back to what it was before? And if we don't spend enough time doing that as brands, it's always going to show in fair weather communication. Because it's going to move away very quickly. And another brand is going to come and sing this song again, and it's going to move away quickly. But a lot of times, people can recite a thermocool ad. You know that thermocool ad with the guy? And I think about it when you watch the ad, it tells you about the feature. And then we are all concerned about buying a brand with features because there's a reason.
Absolutely.
And it's research that's showing us that. So we need to go back to the research.
Absolutely. To our clients.
Everything she said and more, what she said is, do your research and, like the competitive landscape, the consumer is always evolving. So we should unlearn old ways of doing things and, embrace new things. Of course, we're very agile enough to know when the cheese has moved, you know. So don't just say, oh, it has to be a man that I put in front of the bank and a woman when she should be in the kitchen cooking. You know, things have evolved. People talk about new interests, new hobbies. So hand on how they say, finger on the pulse. Just always try to know what is going on around you, and then do your
Thank you
research.
very much. To Mr. Faye, I mean, your questions, because I know that while you were in Insights, you worked on a plethora of great brands. I would have really loved you to just give an example of a brand that was intentional in that area. You don't have to mention the name, but you can just wrap your answer around the brand, and then also land on what advice you would give to professionals.
I think
it's
it's interesting you say that. I think it's just a variation of what they both said. You have to listen to the consumers, especially if you're talking to women consumers. You have to listen to them, and listening to them means talk to a woman in that category that fits that profile. Don't think you know. There was a brand we worked on that we developed something for southwestern Nigeria, southern Nigeria, and the profiling was built on Lagos consumers and all of that. And because Lagos women don't like, they're sort of westernized, they don't like the title wife. So that wasn't put in the commercial. It was more like, leader, whatever, and all of that. However, when it was tested with the northern woman, it was different. To her, wife was part of our identity, and we had to accept and put that there. We didn't need to force what we thought about the southern consumers. We didn't need to force that in there. So listen to the consumers. Talk to them. If you are a guy, you are working on a brand for females, for God's sake, go and talk to females. Let them tell you. Don't assume anything. You are a guy. You actually don't know. You really do not know. So, I mean, just talk to them. If you are selling to older women, the variations are so many. Women are incredibly more nuanced than men. Incredibly more nuanced than men. Older women are different from younger women, and all kinds of nuances that give actually a broad spectrum to engage deeply with women more than we are currently doing. But we have to listen to them.
Thank you very much. And in summary, I would just wrap up by saying that if we want to, borrowing from what Mr. Faye has said this afternoon, re-stereotype how we do things in the industry. One, we have to begin by creating intentional policies and frameworks for action. Industry bodies, I'm excited that AAA and a body I and all of us on this panel belong to is intentional about rising to the occasion on this matter, and then creating responsible business conduct in everything we do. Stereotypes, we know, like I said in the beginning, actually make people feel excluded. If all of us are speaking about inclusivity, and let it not just be a buzzword, but let it be an intentional action that we all take. Thank you very much for your time, for watching, for listening. And I've just been alerted that we have questions. Oh, okay. We have questions. Please send in your questions and we'll respond to them as we go along. But please stay tuned to the next session. The next session will be happening in 5 minutes. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for staying tuned.
Thank you.
That was lovely.
Hello, everybody. You're still locked into Live and Direct. My name is Folake Stis Johnson, and we're going to be talking about a very peculiar topic, very interesting topic today, which is what's the topic? Beyond influencing, which also looks at the expansion of creativity within the advertising space right now. Today, I have with me 3 fantastic professionals in the marketing and advertising space, and I'll introduce them shortly. First of all, to my very left, I have Adebola Williams. She is the marketing director at Probassador. I also have with me the only gentleman in our midst, Leko Akinyele. Leko is the creative director at 7 Interactive, and I have Sheyi Layade. Yes, I've been trying to pronounce that all morning. Sheyi Layade is business director at Inside. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. Before we jump into this, I just want to say that creative diversity, or the expansion of creativity, has sort of been an ongoing topic in our industry for many, many years. So this is an opportunity for us not just to talk about it, obviously for us to also have practical steps to sort of doing something about it post-discussion. So I'll let you guys introduce yourselves very, very quickly before we jump into this.
Okay, so my name is Adebola Williams. I work with Probassador, Nigeria.
Hi, I'm Olaleko Akinyele, Creative Director for 7 Interactive.
Okay, I'm Oluwaseyi Layade. I work within the Inside Redefine Group as the head of business for Leo Bonnet Links.
Okay, fantastic. So I guess I'm going to start all the way on the other end, Shay. From a business or strategic point of view, my first question is, I mean, we keep hearing culture and creativity in the same sentences or the same statements. What exactly is culture in the context of things right now as we speak, and how does this affect the behavioral patterns or the behaviors of the consumers in today's world?
Okay, thank you. So culture is how people do things, how people live, the way people generally do things. How that affects and how this affects consumers in today's world is that, well, it affects consumers in multifaceted ways because of globalization and technology. There's a mix of cultures currently. So what we are known for as Africans or as West Africans or as Nigerians is not just true for Nigerians. We have a more Western approach sometimes to the things we do, how we relate with brands, and how we take information and process it. So if we drill that down into advertising and the work that we do, the important thing is how to find what is the real way of life of the people, of today's people, of the different target groups, because Nigeria as it is today is over 200 million people, so there's no one way of advertising to that mass of people, right? So it's to think about ways that you can reach different tribes or different segments of people with brands that relate, with brands or a communication style that appeals to them, right? So I think that culture is quite diverse, even though it originates from a system, but because of globalization, technology, you know, there's a lot of infiltration of different cultures into one. So it gives us a basis for expansion of thinking across the board generally in communication and advertising, and how we as we will work for brands, both on the advertiser side and at the advertising agency, how we can come across to the target audience, the different cadres of target audience that we service.
Okay, fantastic. It's very nice. You talked about diversity in culture.
Right.
So I think I'll obviously let the ladies go first, so permit me later on. So I'll be talking to Adebola next. It's very important for brands to sort of, you know, understand how to resonate with the consumers, especially, you know, looking at what these people understand, or what they think they understand, and how they behave. When it comes to culture, she's talked more from a Nigerian point of view. You know, we like to look at demographics, psychographics regularly. But in today's space, we talk a lot more about the Gen Zs, millennials, and these guys are the ones championing what today's culture is like. So when you look at culture in the space of advertising, marketing today, would culture be more skewed towards generational culture, or would culture be skewed more towards regional culture?
I think it's more generational. And with regards to advertising, let me start from here. I think that they both influence each other one way or the other, but I think that it's very important that advertising leverages what culture is. I think social does more of the influencing, while advertising does more of leveraging and projecting. Now, in terms of impact, you need to look at, would say culture, but I would say human truth. What is the cultural truth today? How do we, what are the nuances? What are the ways of doing things? What are the values that we hold true? It differs from region to region. However, there are commonalities, right, that drives us. And I would like to look at it from a Nigerian perspective. We are Nigerians. There's a pride in us being Nigerians beyond what the global perception is. Prior to now, a couple of years ago, the only thing you will hear is about, corruption, fraud, and all. But today, Nigerian music globally is growing double digit. Our fashion industry is growing double digit. It's about almost 20% of sub-Saharan African fashion. Our music is growing. Our film is like the second largest in terms of volume. And if you look at our food as well, there's a cultural revolution when it comes to our food. So I think that for us as individuals, it's very important to continue to take pride in that. I tell people the jollof and the fufu and the egusi eating and, all the content that comes around it on social, it's not by mistake. It's deliberate effort of us, also exporting what our culture is. And it's that projection is done through, music, film, and all of that. Advertising now needs to start leveraging that, right? In relevance to the brands. So, for instance, I was having a conversation yesterday, and we're talking about jollof rice, and you want to have an event around jollof rice. A masterclass is the last thing I would think about, because when you talk about jollof rice, it's beyond the food itself. There's a spirit to jollof rice, whether we like it or not. It's that spirit of togetherness. It's a tribal thing. It is that party. It is, that's come and let's have fun. When it's jollof, there's celebration. That is what I'll be celebrating as a brand and projecting that culture. Do you get where I'm coming from? Yeah. So I think that it's very relevant for brands to start from the drawing board and say, what is my product? How is it culturally relevant, and how do I project it to the world? What are the assets that I can leverage? Is it the influencers? Is it music? Is it fashion? If I were a bleach brand, for instance, today, or I was a soap detergent brand, I should be looking at fashion from a different perspective. I should be supporting our culture, promoting how we ensure that the fabrics that come out of Nigeria is good quality and that my brand is positioned within that space. So when you see the good quality fabric, you also see my product, championing that. So I think that it's interwoven, but while culture is evolving and the Gen Z, pride in us being Nigerian and taking on the mantle and expressing themselves and their Nigerianness, it's very important that brands also key into that and develop products that actually speaks to where the culture is and where the values are moving to.
That's fantastic. It's funny that you mentioned jollof rice. So for every time anybody steps into this country, I say this is my first time. The first thing I'm trying to do is convince them to jollof rice.
Exactly.
And then I find myself getting into that battle of Nigerian jollof rice is better than Ghanaian jollof rice or whatever other countries.
But I think it's not better than or not better than. I think that we need to look at the essence of what that meal is in the first place. It's beyond just the food. It's so much more. So
would you say, because jollof rice has been part of our culture since forever. It's been part of the culture. But we're seeing this emergence of jollof rice meaning something else to the people. And I feel it's being driven, once again, by the younger generation. So the Gen Zs, they're beginning to bring a new spin or a new narrative to this you know, the whole culture of jollof rice, whether it's food, fashion, across board. I think that's fantastic. I'll come to you later on now. So she talked about, you know, a couple of different sectors under the creative space. And for every time we talk about creativity is not just advertising, not just design, it's not copywriting. So you have fashion, you have music, you have filmmaking, there's just a wide range of things. Now, from obviously you represent the creative space on this panel right now. So from a creative standpoint, as a creative director, what would you say the challenges are, you know, sort of collaborating across these different sectors? So when you want to create stuff for brands, how do you bring in all these other things that are not seen as advertising creativity in the first instance?
I don't think it's a challenge. I think it's the most beautiful space that we can be right now. You know, the fact that we are beginning to be very open to this collaboration. I mean, knowing fully well that, of course, music, art, fashion, footwear design, spatial design, sound design, everything just pretty much works together as long as the brand, like she said, the brand already creates, or the product is already created for the people, you know. So recently, I mean, chatting with one of my other creative friends, and it made me realize that, you know, what I think is missing most times is the soul.
Yeah.
Is the soul. So that soul is what would inform who you are going to collaborate with, which segment you are going to collaborate with, you know. And I think it's, right now, it's an opportunity for us, pretty much to, like you said, advertising is just one portion of it. So advertising needs to open up for every other thing to actually, you know, work together. So it's more like you can just, you're like the soul of it, and then you pick, okay, so we need
Advertising is the projection.
Yeah, so we need an artist here, we need a musician here, we need a sound designer here, we need a fashion designer here, and then you bring everything together. So it's like filmmaking, for example. I mean, if you're going to make a film, you need a whole lot of
those people
creative
to come together.
To come together as the director to now say, okay, this is what you're going to do, this is what you're going to do, this is what you're going to do, just for that whole thing. So that by the time you're passing the message across, I mean, people can easily, you know, see themselves in it.
Okay,
and then accept it the way they want to accept it, you know. I think, you know, from what she also said, I mean, if you're also going to be talking to the different regions, and that's what we mean by big ideas. The big ideas are big soul. So you have that big idea that basically, oh, this is what we want to say. This is what the brand represents. So we marry it with what the people, or whoever it is that we are talking to, then we marry it with what they believe and how they accept it as well, because I think that's something that we also must also work on. We need to start understanding how the audience that we want to speak to, how they perceive it, you know, how they perceive it, what they want to do with it, is the feedback that will allow us to see, okay, yeah, this is how we can then,
how to streamline that creativity.
Yes, and then create a balance and say, okay, let's go this way, and then they accept it.
Okay. Fantastic. Thank you so much. So to the meat of why we're here, which is obviously beyond influencing. We hear influencer marketing. We talk about influencers every day. Some people think it's one of the most bastardized notions in the advertising space. So, Shay, what do you think about the influence, and how do you think culture, you know, influences the behavioral patterns of the consumers today?
Okay, so let me start with influencing as it is, as a construct by itself. It's great to the extent that brands and advertisers, and even the advertising agency, or people who create the work for to showcase that other people then look at and want to be part of, whether buy a product, enjoy a service. Influencing is great to the extent that the influencer demonstrates the fact that they are whatever brand that they are influencing for, they are living the truth of the brand. That's how much, or how impactful, or how influencing can be impactful. So, for instance, we don't just randomly think about a brand or a product or a service to put forward and say, oh, who is the influencer that we can hang this on to sell. That doesn't really work, right? So what works, ideally, what should work, or what really works, what should work in practice, is that a brand has a soul of itself, and you were speaking to the soul of advertising, right? So a brand has a soul, has a personality, and then you want to leverage another personality to have an association with that brand, so that people who look up to the influencer or people who are associated with the influencer can have a good feeling about the brand and say, okay, this is good for me because it's good for somebody that I admire or somebody. So that's how I feel like brand influencing should work. It should be a connectedness between the brand and the individual that's influencing for the brand. So if we bring it down to like everyday, so that's what it is really. So if we just bring it down to everyday life, I think that all advertisers, so when I say advertisers, I'm not just talking about the brand owners. So brand owners in the agency and on the client side, right? We should always think about influencing from that point of view. Who's best suited for this product? In the realness, in the real sense of it. Not just for lip service, not just for the fact that the person has 1 billion followers, and then the brand is not following them, or they are not following the brand in reality off camera. So yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. Okay, you want
so I want to add to that. With respect to influencing, I think that there's a whole lot of work that needs to be done within the Nigerian space, especially. What I often see, based on my experience both on client side and agency side, is the client wants to make this campaign go viral. So you look at who has the most followers, male, female, whether they fit into the brand or not, whether even the target audience, would relate to this person or not. It's just a laundry list of people who have followings. So I think from the advertising agency's part, they need to put in the work to actually say who is actually relevant for this brand and what kind of activities can I put around this person that would actually help to drive the numbers. Because don't forget, advertising is not just for let's put out a communication and create awareness. There's a selling to it. Let's be honest with ourselves, especially with the economic situation in Nigeria now. If you are not selling, why am I spending the money as an advertiser? So whatever activity I'm putting my money to, there must be, I must get, return on investment. I must see the numbers coming in. Now, what I find is that within the talent pool and the influencer pool that we have, currently it's more of a everybody doing everything. You don't see people actually positioning themselves. Very few talents are actually consciously building their brands to a specific audience or to appeal to a specific lifestyle. Most times it's random activities here and there, and I think that within the industry, I can count maybe less than 5 people who are conscious about their brands. They think more, they want the ambassadorship, they want the deals and the contracts and the money. But are you consciously building your brand to influence within a specific space that you want to play in, right? I think that is one. Number 2, in terms of influencing, is also brands coming in to say, yes, I want to create awareness, I want to latch onto a popular trend, but is this trend actually relevant to me, or am I force-feeding that trend into? So I know, given that I'm on both sides of the fence, I know that there's been times where the agency will say, oh no, this is not going to work, and the client is saying, this is exactly what I want to do, like I'm the one paying the bill, so give me this. You understand what I'm saying? But I think that it's the ecosystem when it comes to influencing. We need to relook that, and I think that we need to have forums where we're consciously talking about influencing. Otherwise, we're still going to be in this potpourri of who has the highest numbers of influencers.
Oh, fantastic! I think this has been so interesting for me. I'm learning new stuff. So Leko, I want to throw my final question to you. There's this thing that people say today where back in the days, advertising used to sort of influence the culture. So that the culture is influencing advertising. So you see, I want to call them the advertisers, our brand managers, copywriters, or designers picking certain nuances from our music industry, the movies, or the entertainment culture, and then turning that into advertising space. But back in the days, it used to be the other way around. So what is your take on that? Do you think that we could go back to how it used to be, where the advertising, you know, sets the pace on what that should be? Or do you think we've gotten to a point where, I mean, this collaboration we keep talking about, and then we're leveraging on both ends?
So I think that, you know, initially at that time was because advertising was more of where creative professionals really practice, you know, that was really, I mean, that was really known. I mean, knowing fully well that, I'm talking in context to Nigeria now.
Okay.
Knowing fully well that, yeah, we had the music industry, but it wasn't really as big in terms of numbers as at the advertising, you know, industry. Same thing with the movies as well. But if you look at, you know, the growth over the years, I mean, music is doing great numbers now. Our movies, I mean, a lot of investments are going into it. In as much as for advertising, yeah, we pretty much lost steam at some point. So when we were supposed to be investing into some other parts of the creative industry, as wide as it was, we weren't doing that. So we just felt, so all of us were basically, you know, feeding from the same pot. And that pot kept shrinking, kept shrinking, kept shrinking. While other parts of creativity, you know, industry started growing. So, I mean, before now, we're talking about a party that happened some months ago where, I mean, we could see people come from the other spheres of within the creative industry that pretty much we didn't know, you know, or we don't know. And most of these Gen Zs and millennials are, you know, are there. So in terms of, you know, how, and I think it's also very natural. I mean, it's what we call ontological design, where, you know, there's a mix of creative thinking, I mean, cultural thinking, design thinking, and circular design, where basically, so for cultural thinking, I mean, the product influences the behavior, which changes the culture, basically. I mean, a typical example, our phones. I mean, selfie was not a culture before. I mean, when we started using phones, I mean, the days of, I mean, there was no camera phones.
The days of triumph.
The day of triumph, and Sajem. And then the camera started coming, it was at the back of the phones, and then they started noticing, people wanted to take pictures of themselves, and then products, I mean, brands started putting camera in front of the camera, I mean, in front of the phones, and now, so selfie is a thing now, which is basically culture. So, and one beautiful thing about it is that things that we design also design us.
Okay.
So, phones now, I mean, everybody pretty much works like zombies these days, I mean, on their phone. That's a culture on its own. I mean, people are not really paying attention to what goes on around them. Why? Because they are stuck to their phones. So that's a culture already. And in 10 years' time, it wasn't like that. I mean, 15 years before, people would really talk with each other.
It's interesting you're saying that because thinking about it, it's not really advertising that is influencing culture anymore. It's social.
Thank you.
It's social.
Yes.
You go on your TikTok, you go on your YouTube. It's the content being created from those platforms that are actually influencing how we live and then advertising as well. So I think that for advertisers, it's very important to pay attention to what is out there, the content being created, and asking ourselves, is there a product that I can actually develop to feed into this culture?
Thank you.
Or does my product portfolio have anything that I can actually plug into this space?
Yes.
Right? Or how do I engage my consumers leveraging these cultural nuances that have come in? I keep saying from a Nigerian perspective, I know some people say the world is becoming African. I say no, the world is becoming Nigerian.
That's interesting.
The world is becoming Nigerian.
Okay.
Beyonce released an album, her album before this. It was 70-80% Nigerian. The beats, everyone wants to jump on it. Our food, our fashion. The world is not becoming African, it's becoming Nigerian, where our voices are loud. Right? And the rise of this is not just from the music, which is a huge contributor, or the film industry or the fashion industry, but it's also the content that we're putting out there. So I think that it's very important for advertisers and advertising agencies to look at the social space. What are the content coming out of the social space? What is the human truth? Right? And you talk about design thinking. What products or services do we think that we can develop to feed into the opportunities that we see within that space? I think it's very important.
I mean, if I might just add a few things. So, again, you know how design thinking basically works is, it starts with empathy, basically.
Yeah.
So it means that you must really care.
Right.
You must really put yourself in the shoes of the audience. And it's really interesting that you really went this direction, because the fact that, you know, look at some of the music artists that has really come, you know, out of Nigeria right now. I mean, some years ago, we were all tilted towards foreign music. I was influenced by, you know, some of America's most dangerous rappers, you know. And at some point, I needed to really cut that off. The more enlightened I become, the more African, the more I really appreciated who we are. And I think a lot of people are also in that space right now, where they begin to, it's an identity thing. They want to really identify as something. And we have a whole lot in terms of culture and tradition that people are really leveraging on, that they're using. They're beginning to, I mean, way back in the day, growing up, if you speak vernacular in class, I mean, you are like a despot or, you know, or something. But now people are really proud to really speak. I mean, before we came in, you said Yoruba is a sweet language. It is. I mean, I'm into music. I rather rap in Yoruba. Is better than going to go and look for English words everywhere, where I have a language that I can basically express myself freely. And that's what people are doing, an identity thing. They want to express themselves freely, and they are looking for brands and products that can also make them do that effortlessly.
Okay, I just wanted to add, sorry, sis, I just wanted to add that what I like what you said about the culture and how advertisers and advertising agencies should latch on to what's currently happening. But I also think that in addition to that, we can also take the lead in terms of creating the culture and creating a safe space, because, I mean, there's a narrative that would also want to drive as businesses, right? So we can also, in collaboration with that, also take the lead in driving scenarios based on the culture, based on what we see that is happening in culture now, and having other people even latch on that, and just to move brands forward. So I think it can go both ways.
Okay, beautiful. You have heard it from my fantastic industry professionals. So just to summarize everything we've talked about today, the onus is on us as an industry to sort of find how to adapt some of these unique insights from our culture, and you know, find ways to transfer from one culture seamlessly, from one culture to another, whether it's generational culture or it's regional culture, as we've seen. Thank you so much. It's a wrap. And do not forget, tickets are available for the Life Awards on Saturday. You can also watch a rewatch of this. I'm talking about football all the time. Yeah, you can also find a rewatch of this on the website, www.life.com, and on our YouTube page, which is Lagos Ideas and Advertising Festival. Thank you so much, and we'll see you again on Saturday. Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you.